Okay, so today we're going to actually cover the story of Joseph. And I want to set the stage for the conversation because oftentimes, we'll hear stories about Avram, we'll hear a story about Yitzchak, we hear a story about Yaakov, we hear a story about Yoseph, and we have all these different stories, but oftentimes we don't see them as a connected, one continuity of story, right? And so I think that's an important piece to see that in our own lives, there are stories and episodes of life that we share, and they seem to be like a piece of their own, right? But there's this bigger picture, and this bigger picture is not just the picture of the challenges we face, but the challenges of our family going forward and going backwards, seeing a much bigger picture. And I think that the whole story of Joseph has to be seen within the context of the much bigger picture. So what's that much bigger picture? Okay. So obviously there was the creation of the world, and there was the story of Adam and Chava and the initial fall from grace, and then there's the story of Noah and the dividing of the land for his sons, and then there was Abraham who came back on the scene, and Abraham was the one to talk about the one concept of one God in a world where idolatry was the norm. And he was like God's PR man in the world at that time, helping the world to understand the concept that there's a God in the world. And God made a covenant with Abraham that your children will be my special flock, and that you will inherit this huge land, which we know of the biblical sense of Eretz Yisrael, the Holy Land, right? And your children will go through hard times. God promised Avram, your children are going to go through hard times, but they'll come through it. And they'll come through it, Baruchush Gadol, with great wealth, and they will be a light unto the nations. This was a promise made to Avraham. Avram had two sons, one went sour, and then there was Yitzchak, and Yitzchak had two sons, and one went sour. And then there's Yaakov, and Yaakov's got 12 sons. And the prophecy that they know is that there's going to be 12 tribes of Israel, which is one of the things that the mothers were aware of, and therefore there were the considerations amongst themselves of Leah had 6 sons, and Rachel only had 2, and Leah and Bill had 2, and there were all these considerations about the 12 tribes of Israel. With that context, let's now look at what's going on. So Yaakov, actually, but let's get the whole big picture. So God promises that Abraham, your children are going to be slaves in a foreign land, and they'll go out Baruchush Gadol with great wealth. The story of Joseph is the story of the fulfillment of a big piece of that prophecy, that Jacob and his family are going to go down into Egypt, and they're going to get enslaved in order that years later they'll be able to go out of the slavery with great wealth and go to Israel and receive the Torah on Mount Sinai, and all of that comes to follow. There's a critical point, a pivotal point here, which is the story of Joseph. But we have to keep that story in the big picture in mind as we go through the little one, because otherwise the little picture can become very overwhelming, as is our life, right? Every one of our lives can become overwhelming if we get too caught up in the moment, and we don't see the bigger picture of not only our lives, but our lives in the context of the lives of the Jewish people and the journey of the Jewish people. So again, we have to stay mission focused. Back to that concept of mission focus, right? So Yaakov, his grandfather Abraham, had been a light unto the nations and teaching the world about one God. His father Yitzchak did the same thing in a quieter way, not in a big way, but in a quieter way, and raising a smaller group, but a stronger group, right? Yaakov is now in a situation where he's coming back, he's dealt with his journey with Lavan, he's dealt with Esau, and he's coming back to the Holy Land. He chooses to live in Hebron. Now, Hebron is a place which is not necessarily the best kind of place for, it's a rocky area, so it's not the best for pasturing sheep, right? And raising cattle. But at the same time, this is the place where his father Yitzchak had successfully drawn people into the service of Hashem. And so he wants to continue the work of his father and grandfather of teaching the world about one God. So they go to Hebron. Now, while they're in Hebron, there's 12 sons, all good kids, right? But there's this kid, Joseph. There were some unique pieces about him, and that is that he was more like his father than any of the others in multiple ways, right? He had the qualities of Reuben, the firstborn. He had the qualities of Yehuda, who was like the king unto his brothers. He had the properties of Yisachar, which is like a donkey to the task, right? But studying Torah, being diligent in Torah. We've seen that in his past. Joseph had all these qualities. And so Yaakov also was aware that he wanted to marry Rachel. This is Rachel's first son. Rachel is now gone. She passed away on the journey. And when he looks at Yaakov, when he looks at Joseph, he's reminded of Rachel. And so, as parents, we don't want to have a favorite kid, but this just jived. It was just too close. There's too much similarity. And in fact, if we look at their lives, right, Yaakov was born miraculously circumcised. There's a few in our history that we hear that were born complete, right? So Yoseph also was born circumcised. Yaakov's mother was barren at first, and it was through a lot of prayers that she was given a son. Joseph's mother also was barren at first, while Leah had kids, and Bilhah had kids, and Zilpah had kids. Yaakov's brother Esav hated him. Joseph's got a similar problem. Yaakov became famously wealthy, and Yosef also will become famously wealthy. But what's important is not so much that they became wealthy, but that they were blessed to keep it. Many people become wealthy and then lose it because of all kinds of tragedies and everything else, and they end up taking all that wealth that they got and spending it on other needs like healthcare and stuff like that. Yaakov and Yosef both were blessed with wealth, and they both had the schus, the merit to actually hang on to it, right? Only after leaving Eretz Yisrael, leaving the Holy Land, did Yaakov actually get married, and he had children in a foreign land. He went down to Lavan, and he had children down there, right? Yosef goes down into slavery when he's not married, when he's still young, and it's there that he gets married, and it's there that he has kids. So there's this parallel of their life between Yaakov and Joseph. Some of it already happened, some of it is yet, but there's definitely this parallel. And both of them were constantly accompanied by malachim, by angels. We all are, but theirs was a little bit more obvious. And Yaakov was blessed in a dream. He dreamt a ladder going up into heaven, and the angels going up and the angels coming down, and God blessed him in that dream. Joseph will also become great through the interpretation of dreams. Yaakov traveled down to Egypt. Joseph traveled down to Egypt. Yaakov made his son swear to take his remains out of Egypt. Joseph made his brothers swear to take him out of Egypt. Both of them died in Egypt. There's a tremendous amount of similarities between them. The bottom line is that Joseph so much reminded his father of all the good stuff and all the blessings and his unparalleled understanding of Torah. Yaakov was gifted to understand not only the simple understanding of Torah, but even the esoteric things. Those were things that he grasped, but he understood them the first time. So he learned from his father and from his grandfather, because remember, until Bar Mitzvah, Yaakov was learning from both his father and his grandfather, from Yitzchak and Avram. So Yosef was learning from his father, but he understood things easier. He understood things faster and comprehended things. So his Torah understanding was unprecedented amongst all the brothers. And because of that, Yaakov was able to share with him insights in Torah that he could grasp that the others Yaakov couldn't share. So esoteric things, mystical things he could share with Yosef, he couldn't share with the others, but they didn't have the same grasp, right? So with all of this, Yaakov distinguished his learned son, Yosef, by purchasing for him a special long-sleeved garment of delicate silk. Now, what does that mean? That means he's not going to be a farmer or a shepherd, because out on the, farming and shepherding are manual labors, and clothing tends to get torn, etc. Yaakov gives Yosef this beautiful, this coat, this long sleeve coat, and that long sleeve coat of silk is reflective of the fact that he's staying in the house and he'll be not be doing manual labor with the sheep or the cattle or on the farms. So this is where the enmity with the brothers began. Now, obviously, no parent wants to create enmity between his kids, but so much of that relationship with Joseph was just so natural and so smooth that it was hard to catch. But not by the brothers. They saw that, right? Joseph, in many senses, is called an ish tam, a simple person. Now, simple not in the sense of uneducated or stupid. Simple in the sense of it's uncomplicated. Life is pretty simple. There's a mission, there's a task, we stay to it, we do it, right? He doesn't get caught up into games and politics and all the other garbage, right? He's very, very simple in that sense. And when he sees something as a God-given revelation, well, that's it. It's a God-given revelation. Understand it as what it is, right? So when he starts seeing things that seem inappropriate by the brothers, behaviors that are not inappropriate on his siblings' half, he wants to correct them. Not because he wants to be better than them, but because he wants them to be the best that they can be. Given he lacks a little tact sometimes, but that comes from the simplicity. Yep. It comes from the truth is the truth. What's the problem? And he doesn't get that you can't see the truth, because it is what it is. Well, like what's wrong here, right? So when he sees them doing something wrong, he tries to correct them for all the right reasons, right? And if they're not going to listen to him, he goes to his father and he tells his father about what's going on for their betterment. But again, he's missing the tact and he's missing the political savvy, I'd say, about how to get things done, because to him, the truth is the truth. What's the problem? He sees it very simply, right? And so there's some things that he reports to his father about the brothers that makes them pretty angry, right? I'm going to give you an example. If the brothers were found eating from an unborn calf that was not shechted, it was not slaughtered. So how do you eat meat that's not slaughtered? It's not appropriate, right? He doesn't realize that it was an unborn calf that they were eating from. He just saw it was a calf. He didn't realize it was an unborn calf, and the mother had been shechted. If a mother cow is shechted and the unborn calf is automatically considered shechted at the same time, therefore, when eating of the unborn calf or roasting the unborn calf, it doesn't need to be shechted, right? But he didn't see the whole picture, and he misjudged, and he went to his father about it. He didn't get the whole story first. Problem, right? Other examples, and he'll suffer for this, right? You know, the idea of lashon hara, telling stories about somebody else, going to his father about something he's seen done, and you know that will happen to him, right? the brothers will tell their father that they'll show him Joseph's blood-stained coat, and the assumption will be made, right? So again, everything that Joseph does wrong here, he's going to pay for it. He's going to pay for it, right? There was a reference to amongst Leah's sons regarding the sons of Bilhah and Zilpah, that they were the sons of slaves. It wasn't the most couth comment to make, but there's a certain truth to it. Bilhah and Zilpah had been handmaidens. They had been freed to become wives, and so the children born were born to the freed wives, but they had been. But at the same time, there's a lack of discretion there, and the sons of Leah, having suffered the lack of respect to their mother, who was the first married, the first of the wives, but she wasn't the favorite, and so they still felt it. So they're, to build up themselves, they might refer to the sons of Bilhah and Zilpah in that way. But Joseph took it as an insult to them and wanted to defend them. So he spoke up about that reference of there being, sons of slaves, and he'll pay. He'll end up being a slave himself. He'll be sold as a slave at some point, right? He suspected his brothers of dealings with the Canaanite women, the local women, and we know from previous generations that Avram and Yitzhak had both been very careful that their sons should not marry from the local women, from the Canaanite women. And here the brothers are consorting with the locals, right? And so he brings that up to his father as well. Lack of discretion on the brothers' part doing business with the Canaanite women, but that's who there was to do business with. And therefore, it wasn't they were having relations, but they were doing business with. And again, Joseph didn't get the whole story, and he will pay for this. He will definitely pay for this. But all of these matters create a level of enmity between him and his brothers. And you can understand, where that leaves the thing. So when Joseph comes to tell them about, I had a dream, and in my dream, I saw 12 sheaves we were binding, I saw all 12 of us binding sheaves in the field, and then your sheaves all turned and bowed to mine. Mm-hmm. And he's sharing that with the brothers. They're like, you think you're going to be like a king over us? You're going to, be a royal over to us? That's, so he doesn't score any favor points. Let's put it that way, right? But the other thing that's coming up is that the brothers are wondering, is this an ongoing pattern? Yeah, Avram gave everything away to one son. One son inherited everything. Yitzchak had two sons, and one son inherited everything. Is Yosef trying to usurp the situation so that he becomes the sole heir? Because we know there's supposed to be 12 tribes of Israel. That's already been an understanding. So again, Yosef has another dream, and he says that I saw the sun and moon and stars prostrating down before me. And Yaakov had been referred to previously as the sun when he came to Har HaMoriah. The angels had called out, the sun is coming, and they were referring to him. That was in Parshas Vayetze. So Yaakov, he's noting this prophecy that Joseph is sharing, the sun and moon and stars bowing down before me. But Yaakov is also mindful of the other sons and their disdain and their jealousy and their concerns for this Joseph who's trying to usurp the situation, right? And so Yaakov, on his own, he bears in mind this prophecy because he sees this is going to be a prophecy. He had prophecy. He had prophecy coming through dreams. Joseph is doing the same thing. So he takes note of it, right? But at the same time, in order to quell the anguish with the brothers, he casts aspersions on the prophecy and says, like, sun and moon, like me and your mother and your brothers are bowing down before you. Your mother's already passed away. What are you talking about? And so he diffuses it, but at the same time, he knows there's something about this this prophecy. So he bears it in mind, but at least for the sake of the brothers, he dispels the idea as foolishness, right? So the brothers have this concern that it appears that Joseph is trying to usurp the number one position and become the sole heir, as had done the father and the grandfather. So they're very concerned, and they want to stop this in its track because they know that there's supposed to be 12 tribes of Israel, and not allow one to take the throne. And so they're thinking through this idea, and how can they do this? And halacha at the time could give them a position to get rid of the kid. Now the question is how to do that. Do they kill him outright, or do they make arrangements for it? And then how do they explain that to their father? They're thinking about all these things, right? They're out in the field. They're taking care of the sheep. Yosef, of course, with a long sleeve silk coat, he's at home. His father says, your brothers are out pasturing the sheep in Shechem, where Yaakov owns some fields out there. And he asks Yosef, you should go check on your brothers. I haven't heard from them in a while. Go check on your brothers in Shechem. Now, Yosef's answer was Hineni. Here I am. And here I am, Hineni, means here I am ready to serve whatever it is, sir. Having in mind that his brothers don't like him, having in mind that this is a dangerous thing, nevertheless, he responds with whatever I'm told to do by my father, I'm doing. Right? Again, coming back to the simplicity, right? But we know Shechem, the city of Shechem, is already not a healthy place. We have a history there, right? And that's why Yaakov is concerned, because we already devastated the place once. With Shimon and Levi already devastated the place once, and now to be going back there, he's worried. They hadn't heard from them in a while, so he sends Yosef to check on it, right? So Yosef heads out, and he says that he's going to check on the brothers and come back. The Medrash goes into some more detail here. I'm going to skip this at this point, maybe bring it back a little bit later in the story. So Yosef goes out to find Shechem, and he doesn't find them there, but he finds someone. That type of reference in the Torah usually doesn't mean someone, it means some being, which means an angel, right? A malach in the guise of a person. And Joseph asks him, where, have you seen my brothers, right? Now, the malach is there for three purposes. One, he needs to save Joseph from the death of the brothers' hands. He also has to guard him when he is thrown in the pit. And the malach is there to accompany him and guard him on his way down to Mitzrayim, down to Egypt. And we're used to the idea that a malach already is with Joseph, because we've had that discussion before, same as Yaakov, right? So this malach, one of them is Gavriel. And he appears to Yosef in the guise of a man, and he says, whom are you looking for? I seek my brothers. Could you tell me where they are? They have journeyed far from here. That's Gavriel's hint to they've traveled far from a place of being with you here. They're not with you, right? And he's hinting that they've severed their brotherly ties, right? So the malach then he says, I heard them say, let's go Dasana. Let's go to Dasan, right? Now, Dasan is the name of a place, but it also means plotting evil. So the malach has tried to give Yosef a heads up of what's coming, right? As he travels towards Dasan, the brothers see him coming. Even before they arrive, they're already planning how they're going to kill him. And Levi remarks to Shimon. Now remember, Levi and Shimon are the ones that took down Shechem. Those two together can be a problem. And Levi says to Shimon, behold, the dreamer is coming. Right? And so the discussion now goes on. Let's shoot him before he even gets here. Shooting an arrow is like saying Lashon Hara. You shoot an arrow into this, you don't have control of it once you shoot it, right? Lashon Hara, same thing. When you speak bad about someone, once it's out of your lips, there's no controlling that. It could go anywhere, right? So his tongue is like poison. Let's throw him in with the snakes. So this conversation about Yosef's Lashon Hara, and they want to take care of him that way. Finally, they say, let's kill him and cast his body into one of the pits, and we'll say that a wild beast devoured him, and we'll see what will become of his dreams. We will see what becomes of his dreams. The brothers sat judgment over Joseph, and they came to the conclusion they had to put him to death. They considered his evil, slanderous reports to be that which is contemptible for a death penalty. Their intentions were l'shem shemayim. Their intentions were for the right thing, in the sense that, yes, there's supposed to be 12 brothers, and yes, Joseph had been, telling stories to their father about them, and that he's trying to, so to speak, claim the throne. Their intentions are good, but what do they say? The road to hell is paved with good intentions.
Yeah.
So they've allowed their own insecurities to become involved in their decision making, and therefore now you have this situation where they're making a decision, and they say, "We shall see what becomes of his dreams," and God's response is, "We shall see who has the final word," because God is the one who given the prophecy of the dreams, right? So when Reuven heard what they were planning, so he's thinking to himself, I'm the oldest. Now, I don't know if any of you guys are the oldest of a set of siblings, but the oldest one is always put to blame. I know because I have an older sister, and I know how much trouble I did that she got in trouble for it. So Reuben is thinking, whatever goes down, I'm going to be the one to blame because I'm the oldest, right? So he decides he needs to take action, he needs to do something. And so he wants to, he convinces everyone not to kill him, but rather to throw him in a pit and let our hands not be on him. Let's not actually be the ones to kill him, and let's throw him in a pit and then let nature take its course. The pits all had, scorpions and snakes in it, and it's interesting because the Torah says the pit was empty, it had no water. Well, if you say it's empty, then don't I know it has no water? But Remes, Rashi explains, is the pit was empty of water, but it had scorpions and snakes. And so they're going to throw him in the pit. There's another thing that Reuven, as the oldest, had in mind. In Jewish law, if the entire court says a person is guilty and not one person can say he's innocent, that court is thrown out. Because if you can't find something good to say about a person, then it's just a hanging court. It's just a damning court. The whole thing is thrown out, and the guy goes free. Because you got to be able to find some redeeming factor about everybody, right? It goes back to our class on positivity bias, right? Yeah, you have to be able to.
Rumor has it.
So Reuben is also thinking that if this whole court has decided he's guilty, he can't be guilty. We can't punish him because we're obviously not a clean court, right? So don't shed blood. Throw him in the pit instead. Now, Reuben's secret intention was to come back at night and save him and bring him to their father, right? Under cover of darkness. We know this because the Torah testifies in his behalf. Good intentions, right? So they took off Joseph's special long sleeve coat, and they threw him in a pit. It was actually Shimon. Shimon's the one who threw him in the pit. We'll see. He'll come back and everything is meter connected, meter, measure for measure, the way things work out. So the Malach protects him in the pit, and Reuven, now he leaves the company. They all sit down to eat, and Reuven has been doing teshuvah, repentance, for interfering in his father's personal life when he moved, when Rachel died and he moved his father's bed to his mother's room, tent. So Reuven is still doing tshuva on that. He's the father of all tshuva, right? And so he doesn't eat with everybody else because he always does a lot of fasting and praying and reproaching himself for his lack of. So Reuven steps off. He's not in the scene, right? The brothers notice that there's a band of Yishmaelim coming along, a caravan. Caravans are traveling through the area, and I think, you know what? Why do we have to lose out? Sell them, right? Make some money. So it happens to be that the caravans are carrying not the usual kerosene and foul-smelling oils and spices, right? But rather, it happens to be that this particular caravan is traveling with fragrant spices, and that's all in honor of the tzaddik that Joseph will be riding with them. And so Yehuda says, what are we going to gain by killing him? We'll be forced to hide his death, and no one will be able to see. We're going to end up getting the same punishments, right? By selling him, we can achieve the desired effect of getting rid of him, but without any blood spilling, right? So let's sell him to these Yishmaelim. Now we're going to find that by the time they actually get to the sale, it's not the Yishmaelim, it's actually the Canaanim they sell him to. But at the end of the day, it's a traveling, one sale after another, right? So the brothers honored Yehuda as a king amongst them. They respected his words. They said, Canaan, who sinned, was punished with a curse of slavery. Let us sell him as a slave too, and in that manner he will also be humbled. He ends up being sold to Midyanim, who then drew nearer, and they go back and forth in the slavery trade, right? Now Joseph is crying out, "Why are you doing this to me? I'm innocent. I only told you the truth. I didn't say anything. I didn't say any lies or make up anything. I'm only telling you the truth. Why are you doing this?" The money they received from the sale, they bought themselves shoes, and this was symbolic of the fact that they meted out punishment for Joseph's arrogance, as they saw it at least. And they established their authority over him by stepping on him rather than allowing themselves to be trodden upon by him. Of course, Hashem's response is that you sold Rachel's firstborn for 20 silver pieces. Therefore, in the future, all of your firstborn will have to be redeemed with 20 silver pieces. So in other words, we'll find out later about that sin, right? So there's going to be the sin of selling Joseph was not atoned for until the tribes had already passed away, but it had its effect later on. Later during the Roman conquest, one of the Roman emperors will use Torah against us, and he'll say, "What's the penalty of selling your brother?" And the sages will answer, "Death is the penalty for selling your brother." And he said, "No one has ever paid the price for the sale of Joseph." There were 10 brothers that were involved, and so 10 great sages of the Jewish people would be slaughtered by the Roman commander at that time. That was his excuse to this situation. We remember and we mourn this tragedy every year at Tisha B'Av. We mention the 10 martyrs. What's fascinating is that as soon as the Yosef was sold, the enmity of the brothers disappeared. It was gone. And so we understand from here that this whole thing between the brothers, God, it was a setup. It was a setup from God the whole time. It was a setup. God had put an enmity between the brothers in order to get Joseph to be sold and go down into slavery to set up for the future prophecy to be filled of Abraham. Jacob's not going to go down to Egypt without a really good, solid reason to do so. So by the fact that Yosef is there, he will go. If you remember, when Abraham was living in the land of Israel and there was a famine in the land, so he went down to Egypt. And he set the example for what the Jewish people would do in the future. When Isaac had a famine in the land of Israel, he did not leave. So Jacob had two sources. Grandpa didn't go, Grandpa went, and my father did not go. And in and of himself, Jacob would not have gone down to Egypt. But the fact that Joseph was down there, that was the impetus that Jacob and the whole family would also go. So this is a setup. From the get-go, this was a setup by God, that Joseph has to go so that Jacob can go, so the whole family can go, so we can have the years of slavery, that we can come out with great wealth, all to fulfill the plan that God told Abraham in the beginning. So this is all being played out, right, in this story here. So now it all of a sudden makes sense that as soon as Joseph is sold, the enmity of the brothers against him is vanished. There's no reason for it anymore. There's no purpose. He's been sold. It's done. It's gone. Can you imagine the guilt and the shame that the brothers now feel that they're going to go back to their father? We sold your son. Their enmity is gone. Their logic of why we have to get rid of him has dissipated. Now all they feel is the guilt and the shame. And so they can't say anything to their father. They're torn. So they make a pact between themselves. They make a pact between themselves that no one's going to tell Dad that we sold him. Right? They make a pact amongst the 10 of us. They a solemn oath. They're not going to say anything. Now, the problem is that Reuben wasn't there. So there's only 9. You don't have a minion to make that oath, right? That binding oath. So they counted God in on it. He's the 10th man at their minion, right? He counts God in on it. And so God's now included in this pact. Reuben comes back. Oh, yeah. Where's the kid? We sold him. Oh, yeah. He knows he's going to get the brunt of this because he's the oldest, right? And so, like, Reuben doesn't have enough to do tshuva for. Reuben, like, now he's responsible for this also. So he's just torn apart. Reuben is torn apart. And the brothers decide, in order to, they can't tell Dad the reality, and they can't tell a lie. So they slaughter a goat, and they use its blood because it's similar to human blood, and they cover the coat with blood, and then they bring the coat back home, Joseph's coat, and all they do is they say, Dad, do you recognize the coat? Well,
A lie by any other name.
obviously, Yaakov, immediately his mind goes to worst possible scenario. Yep. And he makes an assumption, right? So he cries that his son is dead, and he is overwhelmed and heartbroken. It's crushed him. He lost his favorite wife. Now he's lost his favorite son, and he's totally crushed. Now, the interesting part here is that God gives a bracha. God gives us a blessing. The blessing is that time heals. When someone dies and it's fresh, it hurts the most, but over time, the sorrow passes, and we recover, and we're able to get back into life, and time heals when it comes to the loss of a deceased, right? But he's not deceased. So that blessing that God gives in letting go, Yaakov never had that. 22 years that Yaakov was mourning for Joseph like it was the first day. 22 years he felt that loss. It's interesting because we talk about Yaakov as the chosen of our patriarchs, right? what kind of blessing is chosen here? Yeah, Yosef wanted to kill him. Lavan wanted to take everything. Yosef wanted to kill him. Rachel dies. Yosef is sold. 22 years of mourning. I mean, wow. Right?
Brings to mind Tevye the fiddler. Couldn't you choose somebody else for a change?
So we're going to stop here this evening at this part of the story, right? But the idea is that as much as we see the pain and the suffering and the thoughts and everything else, it's tragic in the moment. It's horrifically tragic in the moment. And the moment, I mean 22 years, right? It's horrific, but God has a plan. And it fits exactly into God's plan of the promise made to Abraham. There's another story, a completely different time period, not associated with this one, but the concept, right? So Rabbi Akiva and some of the sages were walking through the grounds of the temple that had been destroyed by the Romans. And they were crying, and Rabbi Akiva laughed. And they said, "Why are you laughing?" He said, "Why are you crying?" And they said, "Because the temple was destroyed." And here you see a fox running across the temple grounds, what used to be the Holy of Holies. And Rabbi Akiva answers, "I laugh because I see the fox." And that means that just as the prophecy of the destruction of the temple was fulfilled, so too will be the prophecy of the temple being rebuilt with Mashiach. So there's a time to mourn, there's a time for the difficulties and the sadness, but don't lose sight of the big, big picture. God made a promise to Avram, Yitzchak, and Yaakov, and it will be fulfilled. There's challenges along the way, and some pretty big ones, but we should never lose sight of the big, big picture that Bnei Yisrael, the Jewish people, are an Or LaGoyim, a light unto the world, and that we will be the guiding light to the world. Our job is to fulfill the Torah and mitzvahs as best we can, and to stay on the right path. And we will see great, great blessings, and we'll see that in another coming up class.